Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about The Obstacle is the Way. No, not that book. Actually, a very physician-specific book about how the obstacle is the way, how being a change maker could be the way to get you out of your rut. So on today's episode, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Andrea Austin. She is an emergency medicine physician and director of healthcare modeling and simulation certification at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and for Southwest Healthcare. She hosts the podcast Heartline, Changemaking in Healthcare, so definitely check that out. And her book, Revitalized, a guidebook to following your healing heartline, follows her burnout narrative, offering insights on thriving in a challenging healthcare system. So, Dr. Austin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness, your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/setforlife today. Secure your future before life makes that choice for you. And welcome back. So, Andrea, I want to start with a story, okay? And so the story is the defining moment in your life and career where you decided to become a change maker in medicine.
I'll paint the picture for the audience. I was 1 year out of residency. I was a Navy emergency medicine physician deployed to Al-Assad, Iraq. I was working in the trauma bay. Part of the ceiling was missing from a mortar attack. Welcome to work. Looking up at the ceiling. I'm no longer in Kansas anymore. And I was a simulation educator before I came on that deployment. And I didn't really think I was going to use simulation while I was deployed. And a few trauma cases in that had some opportunities for improvement, I realized that I was going to need to pull out my simulation expertise in this very different environment. And let's face it, I was a new attending. I was a junior officer, and I was somewhat intimidated by the general surgeons that were there. And we were running traumas together. We took the trauma lead role back and forth. And my relationship with the surgeons improved because I was a change maker. And because I saw problems and had a solution with simulation. And that was the first time that I was like, I can do this. And
so
this is really important. Let's take a step back
and just define change making. How are you defining change making?
Yes. So very good question. And one that I've spent hours thinking about because words matter. If you look at the change literature, which is largely out of the organizational psychology world, change agents is a very common term that you find. Change agent means somebody who makes change. It's not really complicated. So this term change maker is very specific that I use. And it was a term that I came across that was defined as somebody that makes change with society's good in mind. And so that's very different because you can be a change agent. We're seeing tons of change agents in healthcare right now. We're seeing companies come in and completely destroy physician groups. They're change agents. I would say they're change agents, but not change makers. Change makers are people that are trying to improve healthcare, thinking about what's going to be the impact to this community, to these patients, to the healthcare professionals working in this industry.
It actually reminds me of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, right? In the people that did best in the concentration camps were the people that found purpose, right? Like their lives were so awful but they came out the other side in a better place than some people because they found ways that they could help other people. And it sounds like that's what change making really is.
Yeah, you completely nailed it. And in the research that I did on physician change makers, change is hard. It's a euphemism, but it's very true. Change is hard. So when you ask people, how were you able to do it? What made you stick through a project where a lot of people may have quit? And what physician change makers said is, I thought back to something early in my life. I was sick and I had a really difficult time with the healthcare system, and people weren't treating my pain or treating me in a way that I wanted to be treated. So I think back to that moment, or I think back to a family member facing discrimination in the healthcare system and having a worse healthcare outcome because of that. And that fuels me to keep doing my work. And I thought that was really, we all know that on one level, but on the other level, to really crystallize that and make sure your own change-making story, because it's going to get rough out there. And so what are you going to come back to?
Can you give us some other examples of change making in healthcare, like specifically for physicians? Because it sounds like such a broad reaching term and it can apply to so much. To paint a better picture for our listeners, what are some examples of other physician change makers that you've encountered and what their change making has been?
Yeah, I would say anybody who's been on my podcast, and probably your podcast by definition, is a change maker. Think of any problem there is in healthcare and who's that face that's trying to fix it. Some of the listeners may know, if they watch CNN, Dr. Megan Ranney, who's been on my podcast, is a great example of a physician change maker. During the pandemic, we didn't have PPE, so she founded a nonprofit to get healthcare professionals PPE. Dr. Dara Cass founded feminiem.org. She's definitely a change maker. But what I want the listeners to know is you don't need to found an organization. Certainly people like that are by definition change makers and trailblazers. But small acts in your organization add up and are change making. Even when you use your voice to bring up a patient safety thing and file the patient safety report or send an email or speak up at a staff meeting. I recently spoke up about something at a staff meeting, and afterwards everyone was like, we couldn't believe you did that. Oh my gosh, we've been thinking this for 6 months. And I honestly thought it was a very small thing. So I think start small, start with what matters to you, and then that may build into something bigger. But you don't have to found something to be a change maker. You can be a great follower of something already.
We're not talking about liking on social media. We're talking about contributing to the cause and doing work, but even though you're not the one leading the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of times in my own life, sometimes I'm the trailblazer, right? My podcast, my book, I wrote that, I produced This Is Mine. But a lot of times I'm a follower. Feminiem, an organization that I mentioned that I really care about. I run a committee within that organization, but I'm definitely supporting the CEO of that organization. The same with my hospital system. I'm a leader within it, but I'm not the CEO. So there's times that we're the leaders and there's times that we're the followers. And if you're always the leader, aside from maybe being like literally the president of the United States, then maybe you should think about that.
Right? Like, to some degree, we're all followers of something.
Yeah,
you
usually.
can't be the leader of everything all the time. And so maybe, make sure your aspirations aren't too big too soon. Start with emailing something that everybody's thinking and build from there. But what would you say to the physicians that are reluctant to even do something like that? They're like, we're exhausted. We're overworked. I've got a full plate at home and at work.
Yeah.
I see tons of patients, and then I've got to document, and then I've got to do all this admin tasks that I don't want to do that have nothing to do with being a doctor. And then I've got to carpool, and then I've got to cook dinner, and then I got to do the laundry, and then I got to wake up and do the whole thing over again. And you're telling me I got to be a change maker too? Come on. What are you going to say to that person?
Yeah, I think we all learned during the pandemic. Hopefully most people have learned at this point, you've got to put on your own oxygen mask first, or you can't pour from an empty cup. So 100%, you need to take care of yourself. And what I really liked about my thesis and my research is the premise we used is that all organizational change begins with a personal transformation. Like, let that sink in for a minute, because it's a lot. We all walk around and many of us are screaming like healthcare is a dumpster fire. There's so much going wrong here. How do we really expect it to change if we're not also on our own transformational journey to become better leaders, thinking about your platform, becoming better communicators? One of the issues right now in healthcare is a lack of trust between patients and doctors. Why don't patients trust doctors? We're not always great communicators, and we understand there's time pressures, but that's what's great about your platform. I would encourage that person to continue to do their own personal work, to transform, to be the leaders, because when you're leading and you're communicating well in your workplace, that influences the team around you, which then changes the organization. So self-team organization. One thing I would tell people to think about. The other thing is that what we know about burnout and exhaustion is you only need about 10 to 20% of your time that you're spending to be on something that you love and is meaningful to greatly reduce your risk of burnout. You have to ask yourself, what are you spending time on? And perhaps attending that meeting, you have to ask yourself, what's your energy level? When you leave that room, if it was like, yeah, I was here an hour after my day, but I'm so energized because we made this issue related to code blues in my hospital safer, then your answer is to probably do that again. Now, if that was after a night shift and you're completely exhausted, probably not. But I think sometimes, and I would really encourage people, I don't know about all of that. I'm not really sure how I feel. Have on your calendar, I use my electronic calendar, but I also keep a written calendar. And I do this thing where, especially if I'm struggling with if I should cut something, I start scoring it. Was that a -2, a -1, a 0, a +1, or a +2 experience? And if you're consistently at the -1, -2 on an activity, if you can cut that, you should.
If you like this podcast episode, you're going to love the other shows over at the Doctor Podcast Network. For instance, The Purposeful MD. Dr. Laura Sutton, who was previously a guest on this show, helps you rediscover your passion with The Purposeful MD. She guides you through overcoming burnout and finding fulfillment in your medical career. It's time to practice medicine on your terms. Subscribe and embark on a journey to a more purposeful practice with The Purposeful MD. I did that myself when I was experiencing overwhelm. Actually, if you go back to Dr. Megan Mello's episode from a couple of years ago, she's amazing. From that one conversation with her, it's been a life-changing experience for me with overwhelm, because then I just go back and I slash as much as I can from my, like, how much of this do I really need to be doing? And can I just let it go? Because if I don't care about it enough, it's got to just fall by the wayside. You've got to be willing to, because we tend to accumulate over time. And it might seem great at the time, but it might not turn out to be that thing that you wanted it to be, or you're no longer interested, or whatever. So reassess and then slash. I've definitely done that plenty of times myself. But what would you say to the physician who feels like Sisyphus, who's pushing the boulder up the hill? It's this giant boulder. It's not going anywhere. That's what the healthcare system is, right? Like, it's such a broken system. And especially for those who work in these large healthcare organizations, you're like defeated already. Like, there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to change this broken system. Why even bother? Now, I think I know the answer to that. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's find the thing that you're most passionate about, that you think you can make a difference. You can't correct the whole system, but there can be something small where you really can make a difference. And enough of us do that.
Right.
Then we really can change the whole system. But your job is not to fix the whole system. Your job is to just find something that really gets you motivated. Find that one thing. Like what I did in my organization was patient experience. You know, what I realized that we didn't have anything like that in our organization. And I had done a bunch of interviews on patient experience. So at that point, I had some expertise. And so then I brought it to my organization. And that's the thing that I'm now in charge of. And that really lights me up. That really gets me excited. I'm sorry, I may have just answered my own question, but like you wrote a whole book on this. So what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I felt like Sisyphus when I was at my worst phase of burnout. Sisyphus is very associated with learned helplessness. And that's a really important thing for physicians to think about. Cherie Johnson is my coach, and I encourage people to look at Cherie's work. She's a psychologist, and she only coaches physicians. Cherie coached business people before she started working with physicians. And she said to me once, I've never met another group of professionals that exhibit less agency than physicians. And when you take a step back, literally the healthcare system would stop. It would crumble. And I'm going to tell you something that it was finally the light bulb moment that made me understand my agency. One of our physicians in our group did work with Doctors Without Borders. And it was in a country, and I'm blanking on the country name right now, and I don't want to misquote the country, but it's in my book. In this country, the physicians went on a strike. It was in Africa. And he was there during that. And he watched the healthcare system crumble. He watched babies be not treated in the NICU. He watched hundreds of patients be let out onto the streets from psychiatric hospitals, and the military had to come in and help with the situation. He watched essentially chaos. And it's interesting, if you Google those stories, which I have some references in my book, there's very few of them. So I'm really thankful that Shen shared that story with our residency, because it helped me understand, like, we really are the glue of the system that continues to crumble. And if we take a step back and understand that no matter how they try to make us feel like cogs in the machine, that we're going to replace you with APPs, that AI can do what you can do, and you're really not necessary, it's just not true. So don't buy into that. Don't hand over your agency, and understand that what we really need is collective agency. So individual agency is, I believe what I do matters and has an impact. Collective agency is, there's some really big problems that I can't fix on my own. And physicians are terrible about coming together. I'm not going to get into the union debate. If you want my thoughts on unions, it's in my book. I think they're part of the solution, but not the entire solution. And here's another prime example of where physicians are going to lose the forest for the trees. Maybe it's unions in some areas. There's other ways for us to collectively come together. So on these problems that you're feeling like Sisyphus, look outwards and see what organizations, maybe that's a professional organization, maybe it's a committee within your hospital, maybe it's a legislative advocacy day where you go to the state capitol and you talk to politicians about the issue. There's a million different ways.
I think people don't realize how few people call their Congress people. Not many people do that. And this is what helps them make a decision. So if there's an issue that's going on, if there's something before Congress, whether it's the state assembly or nationally, like, they don't get that many calls. So if you make a call and you say who you are and that you're in their district, it's going to actually have an impact. It might not change their vote per se because of that one call, but it's going to have more of an impact than you realize. So yes, this learned helplessness that we have as physicians, yeah, it really needs to stop. And I think being a change maker, even for something small, can help to unravel that, can help you to unlearn that and show that you can make an impact and then go from there. The chaos that would ensue if physicians stopped working to walk away from your patients, right? I don't want to elaborate on that. That takes a dark path.
Yeah, it was a dark path. What I will say, as many of us do not think will strike in the United States, there has been some physician groups that have gone on strike. There is an in-between, and this was in a talk that was at Legislative and Advocacy Day, the Leadership and Advocacy Conference that the American College of Emergency Physicians does. And they mentioned that we hold the keys to billing. So we could still see patients and not sign charts. So don't get it twisted out there. Like, we have a lot of power. When I heard that, my brain just went, whoa, that's how you hold the white hat. The white hat is you still take care of patients, but you say, we're turning off
Yeah.
the money until the situation
the margins
gets
that
fixed.
they operate on aren't as great as you think they are. So just one day of cutting off that supply would have a tremendous impact. Okay, so we've talked about the importance of being a change maker to prevent, and how much change making you really need, but it's not that much to prevent burnout and help your professional and personal well-being. We've talked about these mental barriers that we put up that might prevent us from doing that, and the great ways that we can find following our passion. Can you give us any more examples of other people where it's something small that would inspire our listeners to dip their toes in the water and start their journey as a change maker? What are some more little things that you've seen physicians do?
Yeah. So I really like to think about the Stanford model of physician well-being. And so we want a culture of wellness and efficiency of practice and personal resilience. I'm going to focus on the efficiency of practice. In my environment of the emergency department, one of the most irritating things is if I go into a patient room and I want to look in their ear, you're an ENT, so you understand, all I want to do is look in their ear and the speculum is not there. It's one thing if I have to walk into a room to find something to look in someone's ear. It's another thing if I open a crash cart and there wasn't the correct piece of airway equipment. That's a whole nother level. So when things happen, instead of just walking away like that code didn't go so well, and hopefully somebody figures it out, like how to get that crash cart figured out, you're the doctor, you're the physician leader. So say, hey, we got to get this crash cart sorted out. We got to make sure the supplies are set up in a way that we can take care of our patients safely. And seeing that through, a lot of times those things aren't like, they don't require that much physician time, just a little bit, just to grease the wheels. I was chatting with one of our nurses the other day that wants to get a kit together for managing upper GI bleeds. And I just need like less than an hour for a physician to look through this and make sure it's the right stuff. So whatever's irritating you, I would start with that. And you might just have to grease the wheels because I know everyone's really busy. But as much as we feel like society and people in the hospital may not respect us, the vast majority of people do. The vast majority of the time, when you say, I'm Dr. So, and I think this is important and we need to address this, maybe I'm lucky where I work right now. The vast majority of the time, people are like, okay,
totally. I think
thank you.
we
Let's
tend
figure
to
this out.
project how we feel about ourselves and our work onto other people. I think, the fact that people no longer trust healthcare and the healthcare system, but the individual physicians, they still trust. People are coming to you because they trust you. So when you walk into that administrator's office, you're like, listen, this is really important. And I think you just need to say the words patient safety, right? Start everything with patient safety, and then it'll be more likely to happen. But we often project our own insecurities and our own sense of futility onto other situations, and we shouldn't do that, right? I don't think your experience is an isolated one. I think our positions still carry a lot of weight. But that being said, you want to make some change, it's going to happen. That's not necessarily the case because institutions are resistant to change. So what's your recommendation in the face of institutional resistance? Let's say we get pushback around whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. It's not in the budget. We don't have time for that. We don't have the personnel.
Yeah. So it was interesting interviewing change makers, which I identify with the people I'm interviewing with. But I have to say, somebody who's really done a lot of change making in my career, the people I interviewed blew me away with the level of how much they stuck to their guns. Like they just didn't take no for an answer. No was a starting place. I think that's a mantra. No is a starting place. And I think a lot of the frustration for physicians comes back to we don't have very much time. So a lot of times when we're working on something, we're asking everyone to catch up to where we are. The truth is, like when you're meeting with an administrator, so I think about simulation like 90% of my professional day. They think about simulation really when they're talking with me, which might be quarterly with a chief operating officer. So it's going to take a while to get them to a level and to a comfort to come to a lot of the same conclusions that I've come to. So I think you have to have so much patience. And if I could go back and tell younger Andrea, how to be more successful as a change maker, is the other thing that people did in this study is they chose relationships. So when you have an opportunity to maybe go for the win, go for the kill, whatever it is, preserve a relationship whenever possible. And if it's going to take more time to build a stronger coalition to make that change happen, almost always take the longer route and make sure you have the coalition behind you. Because a lot of times you can probably maybe muscle something through, especially if you've got some titles behind you. But the question will be, will the change endure and be sustained? And so if you didn't maintain the relationships on the way to enacting that change, don't be surprised when it falls apart. So honestly, many people listening are probably familiar with Kotter's change framework that like, okay, you've got to build the coalition, you've got to trial it, and then, you've got to sustain the change. What my study looked at is what's the stuff in between the steps. And the stuff in between the stuff is all the emotional, mooey, ushy, gushy, Brene Brown stuff. Because if you're not maintaining your own, controlling your own emotions, emotional regulation, and being that leader, and also attending to the other people around you, you just can't do change in the healthcare space. It's so reliant on collaboration.
So what I'm hearing actually reminds me of something that I learned from one of my episodes from like years ago. So when I was a resident, you had your list, right? Your list of things that needed to get done, especially when you're an intern or for an ENT PGY2, right? Where you're not in the OR, you're just ticking things off your list, right? And if you were chit-chatting with anyone in the hall, it was a waste of time. It was detracting from you going down the list and taking care of business. However, now that's different. You need to view that as part of the change making. That's relationship building. So the stronger those relationships are, the more, so you're talking about quarterly meetings with an administrator talking about simulations, but if you're seeing that person in the hall every so often and chatting to them about doesn't matter what, right? You're building that relationship, you're building that trust. And so then you're going to be able to move things through even faster. They're going to trust you more to take the reins on whatever it is you're trying to push through. So that ooey gooey stuff that you're referring to is that relationship building. Yes, you need to work on yourself to make sure that you're in a position to have the confidence and ability to make these things happen. But that relationship building is critical. And it's not a waste of time. You're actually doing something that doesn't matter what you're talking about. You're building a relationship. As long as you're not just talking about yourself. You're listening to them too. You're asking them about themselves. So amazing advice. Okay, so if they want to learn more about change making, right? They can find you at Heartline, Changemaking in Healthcare, and your book, Revitalized, a guidebook to following your healing heartline. And if you had one more piece of advice for a listener who's feeling overwhelmed but wants to make a difference, what would that one more piece of advice be? And it could even be repeating something we already said today.
Oh, I'm going to say, certainly if you're driving, maybe not do this, but if you're walking or sitting, look at your palm and find the longest horizontal line on your palm. That is your heart line, and it's said to represent your emotional well-being. So I would ask people to look at that more and ask themselves, what do they need? They may need to walk outside and take a deep breath. They may need to have some sips of tea. They may need to walk over to somebody and have a difficult conversation. But I think the more that you get in tune with yourself and can listen to what you need, you're going to take better care of yourself. And ultimately, that will reflect in how you interact with other people and enable you to be the change maker that you and the
Amazing.
healthcare system
Dr. Andrea
need.
Austin, again, Heartline, Changemaking in Healthcare, the podcast, and the book, Revitalized, a guidebook to following your healing heartline. Thank you for all you do for your patients and for our profession.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review, something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice or financial advice or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.